food community. And I think this was largely driven by our belief that if our society is going to address our climate crisis and put ourselves on a more sustainable path, one of the fundamental pillars of doing that is by creating and strengthening our local food networks and sustainable agricultural operations. And then I was just kind of curious, like, could we actually even make this work? Like, who would buy and eat goat in Montana? And can we, at the scale that we are, which is small, make that kind of a viable operation? We learned a lot about different sustainable practices. We have a guard donkey. His name is Joe. And our goal really was to produce a quality product that was loved by consumers, and ideally it would pay for our goats vet bills and feed. That was kind of the goal. We also have the goal of raising a child to be a stellar human being in the world, and being connected to a farm. Animals and our planet are super important in that goal. So we were making progress. You know, we had developed a few really great relationships with some primary customers. We were sharing the farm with different organizations and youth groups, and really sort of engaging in education, and just inviting a lot of people to come be part of the farm and learn about goats. And our primary market was right in Bozeman. So I was thrilled. I was like, okay, this is the quintessential local food. From birth to plate, it's in our watershed. And I was so excited about this. And I was very lucky because our primary customer was Saffron Table. And this was a restaurant in Bozeman. They do kind of new fusion Indian food, and they co-branded our product with us, and everything they made was just delicious. And so that's the best advertising you can have, is to have this beautiful plate of food that is scrumptious. And we also learned that Montana, and Bozeman in particular, has kind of an adventurous palate. So that was going along really well. And then a lot of disruption happened. And we know that COVID impacted a lot of families and businesses, the supply chain, and kind of how we are operating our food systems. And some of the impact was that our Saffron Table closed permanently. And that was a loss to our community, and also left me looking out across the pasture at all these goats going, what am I going to do? They took over 80% of our product. So that's the fault of somebody who's just learning and has most of the eggs in a single basket. So I called Becky Weed, and I was like, Becky, what the heck? What do I do here? And she's like, you should really talk to Montana Organic Association, and which was talking with Arrow, which was talking with Soft Landings Missoula. And this really incredible opportunity came together, where we were able to collaborate across all of our organizations and help support refugee families by providing 15 goats to Soft Landings in Missoula. So we processed 15 animals in October. They were halved, and so we were able to support about 30 families. And what was really great, because October, if we can just remember back, time has such a weird meaning right now. October seemed a little bleak sometimes, right? And this was just the most heartwarming collaboration and outcome we could have hoped for. to connect people with to their culture through their food and make these new relationships with awesome people doing really good work across our state. I just recognize that, you know, sort of local food doesn't mean my watershed, it means Montana. And ultimately, you know, sort of the creation of community and finding new paths that sort of check all these multiple boxes of helping people and having culturally appropriate food sources and sustainably raised meat, just sort of aligns with all of our values at Farm 51 and personally, and was just a great inspiration to continue on. So that is all I have. Let me stop sharing here. Okay. So that's kind of all. That was my really quick introduction.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing and introducing the topic there. So where are you now in terms of your the size of your herd?
So my herd is, oh gosh, so it runs around 100 about. Right now, you know, it's kind of at the lowest mark. So I have about 40 kids from this year. I process at a year to 18 months generally. They're all grass fed, so you know, they're a little slower growing. So usually a year to 18 months I process. So I have 40 kids. I've got 30 breeding stock, and then another dozen or so that were kind of yearlings that didn't go in October for processing. And then I only bred 15 this year. Although this morning when I went out to do chores, this is like typical, the buck got out because half of them aren't bred, so they're still cycling, and he was out of his corral into their corral. So I probably have more than that bred at this moment. And then I got into the hay and made a huge mess. Anyway, but my thought was, I just don't know, you know, how our restaurants are gonna respond. And, you know, I have a few restaurants that buy a little bit, but so I thought I'd pull back a little bit on production and just kind of see, not that it's a big operation, obviously it's not. We're processing, you know, 40 to 50 head a year. That's all. So, so I guess we'll see. I collaborated with a local butcher, and we're doing some sausages that we're selling out of the butcher shop. So we did a mild Italian and a chorizo, and I'm hoping that helps people. We found that goat isn't always very familiar to folks, and so they're hesitant to buy a package and go home and cook it. And so we thought the sausage would be kind of a really easy entry to try something new. But I'm open for suggestions for sure. I don't know.
So, Jennifer, I want to thank you for your collaboration with Soft Landing. I have been trying to do that over the past couple of years. I've had several of the refugee families come out to my farm and butcher the goats here at the farm, which was very exciting. And when Soft Landing has repeatedly reached out to me to procure some more goats for them, I just have not been able to get my ranchers to line up to be able to supply them. And it was in October when they last reached out to me, and I was out of town and my rancher just did not respond. And so I'm so glad that you have come in to fill that place in such a huge way. But my question for you is about processing and how you found the backlog or don't have a backlog in your neck of the woods in terms of finding processors, or maybe you already had the butcher dates aligned before?
So I was caught off guard. Normally I process in the summer and then early fall. And so October was the earliest I could get in when I went to schedule. But now I'm scheduled all the way through next October. So, not going to let that happen again. But it was challenging. And, I think that also just highlighted, sort of a weakness, or that if there's a disruption with the big packers, sort of the fallout to our local processors that we use. We process either at Amsterdam Meats or Pioneer Meats in Big Timber. And Pioneer Meats couldn't get us in until January. So
do I understand from what you're sharing, Jen, that basically they ended up taking the overflow and then they got backed up, the smaller processors that you might have used? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was we just keep hearing that over and over in so many different contexts, the impact of processing. Yeah.
And just to respond to Jennifer, it was, some of the families were interested in, butchering themselves and so on, but, transporting the live animals and then having some of them wanted live and some processed, it was just it was a little too complex. And so that's why we just delivered like the halves. And we did reserve all the organs that we were allowed to. It was interesting because, there was, they said, oh yeah, we take the lungs, we take everything. But the facility with the inspector considers that non-edibles. And so they weren't allowed to, and I actually didn't know all of that. So that was, but the rest of them that we could supply, we did, tongues and everything. So
wow, that's interesting. That's really interesting. I did not know that. Okay, and Jen and Jennifer, do you guys know each other, or is this an introduction tonight?
We don't know each other, and I'm excited to visit the farm and learn more about Jennifer's business. The only time that I've had goat at a restaurant, not cooked myself, was at Saffron Table last February. So it was really exciting to meet the maker now.
Jennifer, with a K, how do you pronounce your last name?
It's pronounced Nogin.
Nogin. So Jennifer, could you share just a little bit about your company? Because I think it's relevant to this conversation. And I think you have some things I'd like to hear you share.
Yeah. So my business is called Mountain Meat Shares, and I source whole animals from local farms. I live here in Arlee, just north of Missoula. So I source animals from the surrounding valleys, and I put together a share of pork, chicken, and beef for my customers. So it's sort of like a meat CSA. I started in the fall of 2017. So we're just entering our 4th year. And while the growth has been steady, COVID bumped that in a good way. So business is very brisk now. But in relation to the discussion about processing, I would add to that, it's not just that there was overflow from the large processors that impacted our small processors. Our small processors were already very busy, and then we're also busy during hunting season if they participated in the game meat. But what happened was, in addition to the large processors slowing down, there was an incredible demand, and still continues to be, for local animals and local meat. And that's the positive side of all of this, even though it's negatively impacting our small ranchers because they can't get the animals processed that they plan to. So even when the big processors are back up and running, this problem still exists. And I'm excited to hear all the people across the state who are working to solve this problem. It has impacted my business because my ranchers can't get more I can't expand because I can't get more butcher dates to have more animals processed. And so there we are.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big deal. And you have, okay, go ahead, Mark.
Oh, no, go ahead, Robin. I can
Nope.
take the next. Yeah, I was just really curious, Jen, as you guys evolved from dairy to meat goats, was that kind of your own iterations, or did you have some guidance from holistic management or other planning consultants to help you decide what would work best for you?
We probably should have, but we didn't. So honestly, what happened was, I was selling dairy stock to dairies and to 4-Hers and other like home consumption. And it was just a small like home herd. And I couldn't always sell them, and all the boys get butchered anyway. And so instead of putting them, I didn't like putting them on the meat truck in the auction yards. I just didn't feel right about it. So we started to, we killed them ourselves. We loved them that much is what we did. And then we were just home eating them. And then anyway, and then it was like, well, maybe, maybe other people will want to eat goat. And then it just shifted. And kind of quickly, I just went out and bought a bunch of breeding stock, and I invited some chefs over, and I cooked a bunch of different cuts, and I was like, would you buy it? And that's literally what happened.
That's cool. And could I ask, what are yours and your husband's backgrounds? Is this something aligned with what you do, or is this something totally different?
So what I'll say is my dad was a veterinarian, so I think that has some alignment to husbandry. We both have water resources and watershed restoration backgrounds. And then my husband also worked on some ranches in his 20s. So that was quite formative for him. But we didn't come from agricultural backgrounds. I grew up in an agricultural town, but my dad was just like the local vet. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
And then Jennifer Mountain Meat Shares, one of your customers or purveyors, I guess, is raises goats too as well. Is that correct?
Right. So the goats so far that I have sold through Mountain Meat Shares have either been the goats that I raise or goats that my rancher friend across the valley raises. But we both raise kinder goats, which is a dual purpose meat and dairy goat. And so they're not very big for meat. The rancher that you're referring to is Oxbow Cattle Company here in Missoula. And so Oxbow kind of dove in headfirst, I think it was last year, maybe a year and a half ago, to try to tackle their weed problem on their ranch. They have quite a lot of acreage and a big leafy spurge problem. And so he bought a herd of boar and boar crosses, Spanish crosses, and has actively rotationally grazed them to try to deal with the leafy spurge problem and the weed problem, and which is super exciting to see. He got a grant with People in Carnivores, the organization, to get some livestock guardian dogs, and had an intern that was managing the goat herd. So they also had all the kids and planned on selling them. I'm not exactly sure what happened with all of his because I was unable to get in on some of those. I think processing became a big problem for him this fall, and I do think that a lot of those kids were shipped out to the commodity market. But his hope is that he will be able to find a stronger local market for them.
Yeah, I was curious what the market was, if you were familiar with the goat meat market in Missoula, but perhaps that's just beginning to be explored.
I think just beginning to be explored. When I have sold the pieces through my meat share, they have gone pretty well. I talked them up pretty well, and didn't put too high of a price on them the first year. People who knew goat were very excited to get it. It was not available in our local food, natural food, good food store here in Missoula. I think that is changing now with some of the Oxbow's goats showing up in the store. I don't know about the restaurant demand. I think it could be explored once we get past the COVID thing. But I think that there's a market individually for them here,
Mm-hmm.
at least from the experience of what I've been able to sell so far.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's great.
No, I spoke to Bart and he said he had a few at the beginning. He got a few goats, and then they had I think they had like CL or something. They had a disease, and I was like, I would get rid of them and start fresh. But I said you should do it. I said Missoula will eat goat. I am sure of it, you know.
Oh.
And so, and then the next thing I know, on his social media, there's like all these goats. I was like, go for it. Like he just went big. And I think some of them did go to a commodity this round, but yeah, no, I think it's super exciting. And we use our goats for weed control on our property, but it is a great tool.
This is what's going back, but we need to retag them. May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
I'm over here. I was just curious, well, to start with, I was curious, Jennifer, if you sold through the co-op in Bozeman or the co-op in Missoula, the other co-ops, and how favorable people are. I mean, are they encouraging you in the co-ops, in the food co-ops around the state? Because it seems to me that would be one area that stronger diversity and variety might be. There's
Yeah.
only one co-op in Bozeman, but
Yeah, we did have at the co-op in Bozeman, we did have some goat there a couple of years ago, and it was just in their freezer case. And this is what happened. So they were really awesome in like introducing it to the community and supporting us. Their freezer case is pretty small there, and the meat manager said it just doesn't move fast enough compared to everything else. And so they currently aren't, they're currently not.
I think it's one area that we have to do some real work of education. Well, I grew up on a small farm in Minnesota, so I'm real partial to, we were on the urban fringe and we got decimated by subdivisions, but, and that stuck with me most of my life, and my career is in conservation. I had an early degree in ecology and botany, and ended up working for agencies and whatnot. But I'm really curious about this whole idea. I think it needs a lot more press, which I think we will try. My wife and I are at goodfoodworld.com if you're interested. It's one word, goodfoodworld.com. And for about 12 years, we've been doing boosting and promoting for people just like you, more or less. And Gail does some consulting, works for Timeless Seed Company, you know. So, but I have a really keen interest in local food, of course. But I'm also catching on to the fact through arguments with people about all of the things that you can do with livestock as far as improving the environment. And I don't think it's been covered enough or, you know, really addressed enough. With your background in conservation, do you have opinions about that? And thinking? I know big ranches are getting a lot of press as far as working with the Nature Conservancy and stuff, but I'm thinking about small watersheds like yours. And
Yeah, I think there's some great farmers and ranchers and resource managers out there, and there's some really great examples of the restoration and just the health that you can promote and sustain. And that's one of the things that we try to do. I think we tend to do it just more one-on-one. We host a lot of youth groups and different organizations to come out to the farm, and we just talk about it. And we can just like stand there and look at our pasture compared to our neighbor's pasture and how different it looks just on the management, not necessarily the goats versus cattle, but just on how, what the grazing is, for example.
you may do more in the future when we're through with this virus in the areas. Jennifer mentioned spurge, and in the city, we knew people who were moving goats around, in Seattle and hiring them out as weed mowers. But people, I think what I did learn in the years and years and years of conservation was most of the bright ideas came from the 1930s, and that we haven't really got started with the new world of agriculture, which I think we need to with climate on our backs. And I believe that people just like you are going to be the future. So I would pray that you hang on and do well. Yeah, thanks for the conversation.
Thank you. I'm pretty stubborn, so.
Are goats that good at cleaning out stuff? In general, I mean, so that you could control grazing, as if in watersheds in certain strategic areas.
Yeah, electricity helps.
Yeah. Okay, that's probably a good answer.
I think they're stubborn.
They can be hard to contain. I'll just say, they really, to be honest, it's not always easy, but electricity definitely helps. And, you just have to be present a lot.
Jennifer, did could you elaborate on that experience? You know more about the spurge and how you were using animals for the people that were using animals to control?
The question for
Yeah,
Jen.
I think it's a long-term process.
Oh, no, we'll get your sound back.
Oh, my.
Oops, my mute was on. I think it's a bit of a misnomer when people say, well, goats will deal with your weeds. They will, but one thing that I've learned about goats, and I'm, only 3 or 4 years into raising them, is that they are incredibly picky. Now, maybe that's just the ones that I have, and maybe it's just they are really, really picky. And so I think that they would have to be, and Bart, I'm sure at Oxbow is learning this, but I think you really have to be very strategic about how you're going to use them and where, and what forage they have available to them. Where he had them, at least in terms of the spurge, he has some really great photos that show the line where, he would move the goats in their temporary fence, and there would just be a line in the pasture where they had eaten all of the spurge and left but there was really nothing else growing there. So they didn't really have a choice. Mine have a choice. And so they're very selective about what they like. I also noticed that even with the weeds that I have, they're selective about the time of year and the time of growth of each of those plants. So you would need a lot more goats than I have, even on my tiny acreage, I think, to make an impact on the weed problem that I have. But I do think it can be successful. I just think there needs to be strategy to it, not just turn them out and hope the weeds go away.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
I've had conversation with a shepherd by the name of Ivan Train out of Red Lodge, and he has, I think, about 100 goats. I know very little, so I don't even know what kind of goats, but I don't know, it's 100, 150, and they travel with the intention of using it to help manage native invasive species, you know, in that area. And what he has discovered is that even if they get it, and I, you know, please, this is secondhand, so I'm a little nervous because
Mhm.
I kind of could be making something up. But my takeaway is that even if they get used to eating certain weeds, it may not be in their highest good, you know, nutritionally. Like they probably have a better sense of what's holistically for their highest, you know, health. And it may not be a straight diet of leafy spurge or whatever it might be, you know, and we might forget that in our desire to, you know, overcome whatever it is we want to, whatever management we're trying to have. So he's discovered that it's really a balance between
Always.
guiding them towards the things that you would like them to eat and also giving them permission to take care of their own health. So that's my takeaway from my conversations with him.
Good. Yeah.
And I am just going to point out it's almost 6:15. We're at 6:13, and technically the session ends at 6:15. We can stay on longer. I have said I'll certainly keep it open until 7, but I do want to honor the 45-minute commitment. So, you know, we can happy to keep going, and I just want to give people permission to leave as they wish.
I have to leave, but I'm really anxious to hear more. I hope in this in Aero Expo from small. There are not too many on the list, but maybe we'll have opportunities to hear more from small niche livestock people, especially about zoning rules. I mean, like I grew up and I was wiped out. You know, people didn't like the smell of our farm, and you know, it was all those things with the expansion of development. We're working constantly on trying to get an idea about agricultural land trusts and local tying up some of the land, keeping it in agriculture around the high development areas now. So I think livestock is, I just believe that it's here to stay and that the small producer has a role in Montana. The big producers will go on as they have, and they have a role. But I think there's a whole new world of niche livestock producers. So I'd like to hear more and see more and hopefully share more in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
So I just wanted to mention real quick that tomorrow is Giving Tuesday. Arrow has a fundraiser for Giving Tuesday that's up on our Facebook page. So I do hope that you follow our Facebook page, and if you are so inclined, might give on our Facebook fundraiser. Apparently there's some matching that Facebook's going to do if you match early, like around 6 in the morning. So I know farmers like to get up that early, so perhaps we'll see you there.
Thanks, Mark. That's great. Yeah. Tom and Carol, do you guys have anything you'd like to share from your conversation so far?
No, not off the top of my head. Just glad to listen in and be learning what's going on. We're over on the eastern side here, doing similar stuff. I know a goat producer over this way too, and she hasn't really tried marketing much locally just because she knows that it's going to be a struggle for Montanan palates. But thanks for letting us listen in. I appreciate it.
For sure. Yeah. Thanks for joining. Yeah. One of the Jennifer Knutson from Mountain Meat Shares also has, she's got a number of meat producers who raise pigs. And I was hoping she'd share a little bit about that experience, because apparently there's just processing has been a big issue. But I guess it's just for everybody everywhere. So.
It was encouraging. The governor's COVID relief had a fair amount of funding available for processors for upgrades and expansions. And that was really encouraging. And I've been involved in a couple of conversations. I kind of drop out sometimes about expanding that and different ways of, sometimes the legislature gets a little bit in the way with some more creative approaches, but I think there's some good movement to bolster the processing options in Montana.
Yeah. Are you familiar with a coalition called Grow Montana?
Oh, don't.
It's okay if you're not. So it's a coalition of nonprofit organizations that work in some way related to sustainable agriculture practices for the state of Montana. It includes Natural Resources Defense Council, because they provide a very strong soil health perspective, but it's a coalition of about 30 organizations. Arrow's part of the steering committee, and Grow Montana, it's basically, it's dedicated to helping to drive policy decisions at the state level that support local agricultural practices that benefit the Montanan producer. And mid-level processing plants and all of that is a big policy priority for the organization that we're going to be pursuing as actively as we can during this session. So, good, yeah. And in many ways, COVID has just been a great calling card for supporting the work of the coalition. Yeah, so it's just, yeah, interesting times all the way around. Yeah.
Well, I think I'm going to go shove up and have dinner with my family, but I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'll be checking in with some of the rest of the expos. So thank you so
much. Thank you. This was great. Thanks so much, Jen. I appreciate it.
Really good to meet. Yeah.
All right.